Chapter 12, Family Groups and Systems. So in this chapter, we're going to be talking about and defining family. We'll talk about family norms, what's happening globally, but also in the U.S. And here are the various trends we're going to be discussing: cohabitation, marriage rates, birth rates, divorce rates, um, single-parent families, blended families. We're also going to be talking a little bit about singlehood rates. Okay. The family is going to be groups of people that are related to each other by blood, marriage, or adoption. They live together for a portion of their lives, and they're supposed to work in a cooperative, loving manner. That is the objective. Everything starts with the family, socialization. So it's going to be very important that the environment is very, very healthy. It is the most basic and fundamental of all social systems, political systems, economic systems, healthcare systems, educational systems. Out of all the social systems that kind of make up society, it is the most basic. It is the foundation that everything kind of branches off of, because this is where everything starts. It has the greatest impact on our lives, what happens with our families. Family is also a relative term, no pun intended, which basically means that everybody sees family in different ways. Some people are raised by a mom and dad and they stay together their whole lives. Some people are raised in a co-parenting situation where they spend time with mom or dad. Some people are raised by grandparents. Some people are raised within the foster system. And so their perception of what a family is, how a family functions, can be very different from one person to the next. Sociologically speaking, the family is responsible for um, emotionally supporting each other, financially supporting each other, socially supporting each other. So it's very important that these relationships are strong, they're healthy, there's a lot of good communication, because we are raising really the next generation of not only adults, but the next generation of parents. The family is responsible for teaching family values. These could be religious values, political values, cultural values, and also the norms of society. The family is also responsible for raising children in a very healthy and loving environment. Because as we've learned in this class, that children that are raised in dysfunctional environments can have a lot of issues and a lot of struggles: stress, anxiety, depression, incarceration issues, um, having difficulty getting along and um, functioning as parents themselves. We take a look at the family structures. The traditional family is going to be where the father is the primary breadwinner. The wife primarily stays home, takes care of the kids, takes care of the home. And what we're seeing that the traditional family is starting to decrease. We have more women that are career oriented. We have more families that have the two-income family. So we are seeing a drastic decline of what's referred to as the traditional type of family situation. And we can actually see this throughout the U.S. Census, which calculates households and gets an idea of how households are set up. And we can see the trend diminishing, especially among husband and wife households where you have husband and wives are married. So in 1990, 55% of all U.S. households had a situation where there was a husband or wife. A decade later, it was down to 51%. A decade later, it's down to 48%. 12 years later, it's down to 46%. This is where that trend is going. We do know that marriage rates are going down and they're being replaced by singlehood and also cohabitation. So it kind of explains this. So we're seeing really a reduction in the family unit, having fewer children, less people getting married. And so it's kind of restructuring the family and also how kids are being raised in this environment, how they view parenthood. The nuclear family is the core family that lives together on a daily basis. Usually it consists of husband and wife and children, but it could be a father and his kids, a single father and his kids. It could be a mother raising her children alone, but it's that core family unit that is working together on a daily basis. When you think of extended family, what comes to mind with our extended family units? Who makes up our extended family? Hmm? Aunts, uncles, grandparents, nieces, nephews, definitely. But one trend we're seeing in the US is that the extended family is having less of an impact on the nuclear family. And the main reason is that we are geographically dispersed in this country. A lot of other places around the world, you have multiple generations living very close to each other, living together, supporting each other. We are very much geographically dispersed. People are having fewer children. That means grandparents are having fewer children. So the connection of the nuclear family and the extended family is not as strong as it used to be. Take a look at these two circles, these two greenish blue circles. You will see one is the family of orientation and the other one is the family of procreation. The family of orientation is the family that you are born and raised in. So if you can imagine your childhood being raised within that environment, that is the family of orientation. You may or may not have siblings. Whenever you become an adult and you decide to have children yourself or procreate, then you've created a second family, your own. Now you are the parent raising kids. But as you can see, the two circles, they are interconnected. You are still connected to both sides. The family you were raised in and the family that you created yourself. Moving on, let's take a look at different family norms. We'll take a look at global norms and also what we do here in the US. Anytime you see patri, I want you to think of father, or P for papa. Anytime you see patri, that is automatically the global norm, which means it's the most common around the world. Archy is power or authority. So patriarchy is the global norm globally around the world. This is the most common form of authority. And these are going to be in more male-dominated types of societies. Very common on the continent of Africa, Central and South America, Asia, very, very common. Middle Eastern countries. Matri for mother. So these are going to be more female-dominated societies. A very small percentage of the world is matriarchal. We do have some tribes on the continent of Africa. We also have some Native American tribes that are matriarchal. This is going to be where women are going to have more power and authority over the males within that society, a very small percentage. Now, what we are accustomed to in the United States, also Western Europe, Canada, and Australia, is we have moved away from patriarchy and we've slowly evolved into egalitarianism. So E for gender equality. So in the US, compared to especially patriarchal societies, women have a lot of rights and opportunities, whether it's voting, divorcing their husband, having rights to their children, going to college, being educated, running Fortune 500 companies. The United States does not have pure gender equality, but that does not mean that we are patriarchal. You would have to really take a look at patriarchal societies where women are heavily, heavily oppressed and they have very few rights and opportunities to make that kind of comparison. So we have evolved into egalitarianism, but that doesn't mean that there's pure gender equality. There's no country on the planet that has pure gender equality. But egalitarianism is actually pretty rare as well. You only typically see this in industrialized, democratic, progressive societies. And these are some of the historical events that have moved the United States from a patriarchal America into an egalitarian. Because for hundreds of years, women did not have the right to vote. There were a lot of roadblocks to allow them to become educated. There was a time period in American history where it was very difficult for women to divorce their husbands, even if they were being abused. There was a time period also where if there was a divorce, the husband got the kids, not the wife, because those kids had his last name. Those were his kids. So things have really kind of flipped and changed. So we got to take a look at these historical events to explain that. The Industrial Revolution had its place in not only creating the new discipline of sociology, but it also moved us from living out in rural areas. It moved us more in the cities. And what this did, this allowed women to have more of an opportunity to not only to go to college and become educated, but also to work as well. It allowed them to work, to earn money. So this gave them more of a voice within the household, and it brought about more equality within the household because the husband was no longer the primary breadwinner. When you are the primary breadwinner, that gives you a lot of control over the money and how that money is being used. Home appliances also reduced the overall housework. So since we had dishwashers and washing machines and other types of appliance, it significantly reduced the amount of housework that needed to be done by hand. And what this did, it allowed women to go into the workplace. We've discussed the women's movement before, starting back in the 1840s, but it had a massive impact in moving us away from patriarchy. So not only giving women the right to vote in 1920, which is women's suffrage, so this allowed them to become politically active. We got the Equal Pay Act, which reduced discrimination in regards to pay, made it illegal to pay women less than men. We have Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which we've also discussed that as well. And this is where you're not allowed to discriminate in employment, in the hiring and promotion based on race, ethnicity, sex, nationality. So we got to give credit to the women's movement to progress us into egalitarianism. The last major historical event is also going to be World War II. So the idea is that it's women's patriotic duty to leave the home, to go into the workforce. This gave them independence, it gave them autonomy, and ever since World War II, we've seen the two-income family rise and go up. So collectively, you have to take a look at macro level historical events and how they change and shape society. Next, we have the norms of residence. So again, patri is going to be the global norm. Local is location, residence is where you reside. So this is the most common form of residence where newlyweds will move in with the groom's parents, either move in with them or very close to them. This is very common around the world. This is very common because the majority of the world is patriarchal. And so if you can imagine a newlywed either moving in with or very close to the groom's side of the family, there's a lot of places around the world where you have multiple generations living together. They do this to financially support each other, to socially support each other. The grandparents are much more heavily involved in helping to take care of their grandkids. So it's all about kind of keeping that family unit together. This is very common. Matrilocal residence, this is going to be just the opposite. So this is a rare form of residence where there's going to be a cultural, social pressure for the newlyweds to move in with the bride's side of the family. Again, this is also about kind of keeping multiple generations together to help each other, to support each other. Another reason this is so common because in a lot of these countries around the world, they don't have safety nets like Medicare and Social Security and nursing homes. And so it boils down to the adult children. There's a pressure on them that it's their responsibility to take care of their aging parents, because in a lot of these countries and cultures, they don't have those safety. That's why these multiple generations live together. They have the responsibility of not only taking care of their kids, but also their aging parents. This is an expectation. Here in the US, we have a rare form of residence. It's called neolocal residence. And this is where we live pretty much independently from extended family. There's a social pressure for us to go out on our own, to take care of ourselves, to take care of our families. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's an expectation that you live far away. You can live in the same town, that's fine. But there usually is a pressure that whenever we're grown and we're married and we're having our own kids, that we're not living with our parents anymore. So this is called neolocal residence. You live independently from extended family, and you usually go where the jobs are. And sometimes here in the U.S., geographically, people move hundreds of miles away for those jobs. Now we'll talk about the norms of descent and inheritance. So descent is talking about the bloodline, how the bloodline is being traced. And inheritance has to do with the assets and property and who gets those. So patri is going to be the father's side, patrilineal, tracing the bloodline down the father's side of the family. This is the global norm again. This is going to be tracing the bloodline down the father's side of the family. Another thing that is expected here is loyalty. It is expected within the family unit that you are more loyal to the father and his direct bloodline over the mother and her bloodline. Inheritance, property, and power is all traced down the father's side of the family, typically given to his oldest son, and it goes on down. And it does make sense that this would be found mostly in patriarchal or male-dominated societies. A matrilineal is going to be tracing bloodline and inheritance down the mother's side of the family. And so this would be quite common in a matriarchal or female-dominated society. In a bilateral descent, this is a rare form of descent that we have here in the U.S., and this is where we trace the bloodline and inheritance of property evenly on both sides of the family. We are not expected in this country to be more loyal to dad and his side of the family over our mother and her side of the family. So it promotes egalitarianism. When it comes to inheritance of property, it doesn't automatically go to the oldest son here in the U.S. It's more evenly distributed among all the kids, right? Regardless of their sex. So again, that kind of reinforces egalitarianism, gender equality. So this is referred to as a bilateral descent, two, where the first two, a patrilineal or matrilineal, are referred to as a unilateral, down one side of the family. So the first trend we'll talk about is cohabitation. So please be aware of what direction the trends are going. Cohabitation is whenever people are living together and they are not married. This has increased dramatically since the 1970s and 1980s. Today we have over 8 million couples that are cohabitating. The vast majority of them do plan on getting married. They're just living together beforehand. But we do have a small percentage of those people that are cohabitating that they have zero intention on ever getting married. They want to live together. They may even want to raise kids, but they don't want to go through the legal process of actually getting married. So most young couples before marriage, but like I said, some people also are divorcees. People have gone through a divorce, and they may decide to live with somebody, especially if they're no longer raising children. They may decide that they don't want to go through a divorce again, so they may just cohabitate. When it comes to senior citizens, some seniors are deciding to cohabitate instead of getting remarried. And part of this may have to do with they may lose some of their Social Security death benefits by doing that. And so they may have the financial advantage of living with somebody, but not combining their incomes. Therefore, they can kind of hold on to their benefits. We also see a lot of young people foregoing marriage longer and longer, especially they have benefits like Medicaid, WIC, food stamps, and Pell Grants, because the moment that you get married, they calculate both of your incomes collectively together. And once they do that, a lot of those benefits can be washed away and go away. So there's a lot of reasons why cohabitation is going up and why people are deciding to do that. It is still considered taboo or socially inappropriate, especially among very religious conservative couples. But at the same time, even down here deep in the Bible Belt, cohabitation is not nearly as taboo as it was a generation or two ago. We have a lot of young people that are cohabitating, even in the religious South, before they get married. People have different perceptions of that. Let's take a look at marriage. So monogamy is whenever somebody's married to one person. This is the global norm. This is the most common form of marriage on the planet. Every society allows people to get married to one person. 20% of societies are strictly monogamous, which means they only allow monogamy. The United States would fall into that category. Most of Europe would fall into that category, Canada, Australia. But you do have about 80% of the rest of the world that allows polygamy. Same-sex marriage. Massachusetts was the very first state to allow same-sex marriage in 2004. In 1996, this was President Bill Clinton at the time. He signed what's known as DOMA, also known as the Defense of Marriage Act. And the Defense of Marriage Act stated that the federal government only recognizes marriage between one man and one woman. So in 2004, whenever Massachusetts allowed same-sex marriage, what that meant was the state of Massachusetts recognizes the legitimacy of your marriage, but the federal government does not. So what that means is that whenever they file their taxes at the end of the year, they file joint married in Massachusetts, but since the federal government did not recognize their marriage, they had to file separately. Okay. Fast forward, moving into 2015, it went up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and this is whenever same-sex marriage was legalized nationwide. And at that point, people could file their taxes married on both the state and the federal level. And this was during President Obama's administration. So Bill Clinton put it in place in '96, and DOMA was repealed under Obama's administration. Polygamy, this is also known as plural marriage. This is whenever somebody is married to more than one person. As I mentioned earlier, about 8 out of 10 societies allow some form of polygamy. That does not mean that in polygamous societies you must marry more than one person. It's just an option. There are two main types of plural marriage. The first one is polygyny. This is where a husband has multiple wives. This is highly common in patriarchal or male-dominated societies where a husband has multiple wives. The more wives they have, the more children they have, the higher status they have within that society. The main objective of polygamy has nothing to do with sexual partners. It has to do with having more adults within the family to kind of take care of the kids. A lot of this has to do with economic and social survival. Polyandry is a very rare form of polygamy. Only about 5% maybe of polygamous relationships will fall into this category. And this is where a wife is going to have multiple husbands. And you would find this more so in matriarchal or female-dominated societies. But it's pretty rare. Again, this also has to do with survival situations. Some places people live is very hostile and very violent. And so within polyandry, if the husband passes away due to illness or violence, then another male can step into their place to help make sure that they are taking care of the kids and also the wife. So a lot of this, again, has to do with survival and support. Let's take a look at these two terms here, and this is going to be the differences between marriage choice, and sometimes people will feel both of these pressures. The first one is called exogamy. This is going to be the cultural pressure that people may feel from society or their family or themselves to marry outside of one's group. This is very much cross-culturally common to avoid the issue of incest, to avoid having sexual relations with your own family members, and to not marry your own family members, which is considered culturally taboo around the world. Some form of exogamy are becoming more socially acceptable. Marrying outside of your age range, outside of your race, your nationality, outside of your religion. We're noticing that these types of marital trends are going up. But these are also examples of exogamy, marrying outside of one's own group. A lot of people do feel the cultural pressure to marry within their own group. Most people do marry within their own race. So endogamy is marrying within one's own group. A lot of people feel the pressure to marry within their own religion, their own race, their own nationality, within their own age range. So even though we're noticing a slight increase in people marrying outside of their race or their religion, predominantly most people marry within their own race or religion, and this is pretty much among all races here in the U.S. It's pretty common cross-culturally.
So is this trend decreasing?
For endogamy?
Yeah.
It is based on race, yes, because we are seeing an increase of interracial couples very slowly and interreligious. It is still the norm, it is still the most common, but we're noticing that the overall percentages are going down, yes. The majority of Americans will get married at least one time in their life. Over 90% of Americans will get married at least once. That marriage may last 50 years. It could last 5 months. But overall, marriage rates are declining. So the marriage rate is the number of marriages per year per 1,000 people. We've been noticing as cohabitation rates have been going up and singlehood rates have been going up since the 70s and 80s. It's had a direct effect on overall marriage rates slowly going down. But if we were to break it up demographically, like I mentioned earlier, these specific types of marriage trends are slowly on the rise. Even though they're very small, the direction that they're going is going to be up. The age of marriage, people are delaying marriage longer and longer. They're getting married later on in their late 20s and early 30s. They're having children later. Childless marriages are on the rise, people who are deciding to not have children. So it has a direct effect on birth rates going down. And as I mentioned earlier, interracial and interreligious marriages are starting to slowly go up. Take a look at this chart here. It will kind of show the trajectory of the mid-1990s to more recent times, and it's showing that the annual birth rate has been kind of slowly going down. So these are going to be the number of marriages per 1,000 people. So it's calculated each year. And this has had a direct effect on overall birth rates. Anytime we see marriage rates going down, it has a direct effect on birth rates. So birth rates are the number of births per year per 1,000 people. They've been declining across the board among all races. However, whites or Caucasians are experiencing a negative birth rate. That means that whites are having fewer children than other races. So in order to achieve what's called zero population growth, you have to have at least 2 children to replace mom and dad. On average, white people are having less than 2 children on average. And so what that means is that more white people are dying than being born. So this trend has been going on for at least a decade. This is not occurring with other races. It's just occurring among Caucasians. Other things that are affecting the overall birth rates is the advanced medical technology we have here in the U.S. We have various forms of contraceptives that for a lot of people are very cheap, if not free. Different forms of sterilizations, tubal ligations, where women are able to get their tubes tied. More men these days are deciding to get vasectomies. More men are getting vasectomies than women are getting tubal ligations. It's cheaper, it's faster, it's less invasive. And so with a lot of men deciding to have vasectomies to either have no kids or to stop at 1 kid or 2 kids or 3 kids, all of these are having a direct effect on birth rates, pretty much plummeting. We also have legalized abortion in the U.S., even though it varies from state to state. So if we take a look at the fertility rate, which also means the birth rate, it kind of shows you the trend in what direction it's going from around the mid-1980s to now and what's projected in the future. So if you take a look at the light blue, it shows women ages 14 to 29. Overall, teenage pregnancies have been steadily declining and going down. Young people are much more aware and educated in regards to sexuality. Young people are being more careful, they're using more contraceptive. And so on a macro level, we are seeing the overall teen pregnancy going down. But at the same time, since people are getting married later on in life, in their late 20s and 30s, they're having children later on in life. And so you can see that the birth rate is actually slowly going up for women 30 and older. It's kind of rising. So if you put those two things collectively from today moving forward, it looks like the fertility rate is going to somewhat even out. As the teenage pregnancy goes down, as middle-aged women start to have more children, it's supposed to, what's projected is even out. So we're going to have to see really kind of where this goes in the future. So let's take a look at divorce. All right. Overall divorce rates have been going down since the 1980s. So these are going to be the number of divorces per year per 1,000 people, and it has continued to be projected to continue to go down. As marriage rates go down, it's projected that overall divorce rates are going to go down as well. And as we've discussed in here, that doesn't mean that we are more successful in regards to marriage. 1 out of 2 marriages still are ending in divorce, and the average marriage lasts somewhere around 8 years. If we take a look geographically, if we take a look state to state, it'll show us the areas of the country that actually have higher percentages of divorce. So the areas in red here, these are the states with the most divorcees that are 30 and older. Arkansas has the highest overall percentage of divorcees than any other state. There's a few reasons why. Arkansas also has a very high marriage rate compared to other states. So in this state, people like to get married, but there's also a high divorce rate. So collectively, down here in the southeastern region of the U.S., the divorce is much more of an issue, which also leads into a huge rise in single-parent families, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Okay. Divorce rates declining due to lower marriage rates. Divorce rates are also higher among teens. Anytime you are a teenager, you're dealing with a lack of funds, a lack of education. There may be some issues of poverty. If you're getting married because you are pregnant, now you have the issue and the stress of raising children. So poor, uneducated teenagers that are raising children, they are the highest demographic of divorce. We take a look at the divorce laws. They've changed pretty drastically ever since the late 1960s, early 1970s. During that time, we had traditional divorce laws, which meant that in order to get a divorce, that you have to prove to the courts and to the judge that you have a good reason for a divorce. So this would include things like adultery, neglect, abandonment, child abuse, incarceration. So for the longest time, if you weren't able to prove that you had a good reason to get a divorce, the state wouldn't allow you to do that. As we're moving into the 1970s, the laws actually started to change state by state, and they started to move away from traditional divorce law into what's called no-fault divorce law. Now, no-fault divorce law is nationwide. It's in all 50 states. However, all 50 states approach it differently. There are some states that there's no waiting period at all. You can file day one for a no-fault divorce where nobody's considered at fault. You have irreconcilable differences. You just don't want to get married at all. Here in Arkansas, there's one way to get a no-fault divorce, one way only. Otherwise, you have to go the traditional route and actually talk about why you want a divorce within the divorce proceedings. And this is if you are separated for a year and a half. So if you're separated for a year and a half and you can bring a witness forward to actually show that, then the courts and the judge will allow you to get a no-fault divorce. The one positive thing about this is that you don't have to air your dirty laundry within the court proceedings to talk about why you want to get a divorce. However, no-fault divorce is also heavily criticized, especially among religious conservatives, about making divorce way too easy. And other people have advocated for it. It says that it allows them to get out of unhappy marriages and even sometimes abusive marriages. More and more states are also favoring what's known as joint legal and joint physical custody. For the longest time, it was pretty much the standard that if there was a divorce, who got the kids? The mom got the kids, that's right. Especially whenever the women's movement kind of moved things forward, it kind of turned everything pretty much around, where it went from the father getting the kids to it was preferred that the mothers receive the children. And this was the norm for many, many decades. But the states are starting to slowly change that, where they're starting to favor joint legal. And what this means is that both mom and dad, they both have a say-so in what happens to the child's education and what happens to them medically. They both have joint say-so in that situation. A lot of states are also moving to what's known as joint physical custody. And joint physical custody is whenever both parents have 50-50 opportunity to be with their children. What this means is that nobody has primary custody. There's not a primary parent and there's not a custodial parent. They both have equal say-so legally and also physically. This occurred in Arkansas, and I believe around 2013. So it's been around a decade. Prior to 2013, typically the children went to the mother. The mother would have primary custody. This was somewhat of the norm, and the father would see their kids on the weekends, maybe on Wednesdays, and then that the father would also have to pay child support. Since Arkansas is moving away from this, another thing that it's done is taken child support off the table. If the father is keeping the kids half the time, then he's not required to send any child support to the mother or vice versa. Right? This is becoming much more common nationwide. And if you want to take a look at the actual law that occurred in Arkansas, which actually talks about this, saying that the courts now prefer joint legal and joint physical custody, there's a link right here that you can take a look at that was signed into law in, I believe, 2013. Single-parent families, we've seen a dramatic rise here. So you have around 1/3 or 24 million children that are living with a single-parent family. Some of this does have to do with overall teenage pregnancies. Even though teenage pregnancies are going down nationwide, teenage pregnancies are higher in the South than up north. So this not only increases single-parent families, but it also perpetuates the issue of poverty and also high school dropouts as well down here in the South. More people are having children out of wedlock, and also divorce is going to be a factor in single-parent families. One thing that is notable, if you ever go through a divorce or if you've never been married and you're also raising children, is whenever you are starting to date somebody new and bringing them around your children. There is an increased risk of child molestation whenever you have a parent that is bringing a new person around their children. So this is something that you have to be very mindful of and aware of. And this is why in the state of Arkansas, if you take a look at the divorce decree, it states specifically that you are not supposed to have somebody of the opposite sex or of an intimate relationship staying over the night with you whenever you have your kids, unless you are married. The main purpose of that is to not take away your rights or your freedoms to date anybody. The main reason that they're doing that is because the issue of kids being molested by mom's new boyfriend or dad's new girlfriend. Typically, it's mom's new boyfriend. So my suggestion would be, if you want to date somebody, that's fine. If you want to have somebody sleep over your house, that's fine. But just maybe do it on the weekends or the weeks when you don't have your kids. So that actually is in the court papers, pretty standard in Arkansas. And the reason they do that, like I said, is to prevent kids from being molested. Another thing it does, it also prevents the children from being attached to somebody's new boyfriend or girlfriend and having to deal with that loss over and over again. 30% of single parent families live in poverty. So if you take a look at the poverty rate is going to be going up because you don't have two incomes within that family. And the highest percentage are going to be in southern states, which you can see right here in the southeastern part of the United States. Divorce is higher here. Teenage pregnancy is higher here. So it's all going to be concentrated down there in the southeastern part of the U.S. where we live. All right. And that kind of moves us into blended families. So after people get divorced, about 50% of them get married within 4 years. So it's pretty common. Most people who get divorced, they are in their, over 50% of them are in their late 20s and early 30s when they get divorced. A large percentage of them are going to get remarried within a few years. And a lot of times they have small children whenever they get remarried. And so a blended family, we've kind of moved away from calling it step family. Sociology now calls it a blended family. And so this is whenever you have kids from a previous relationship and you get remarried and they have children. You may decide to have children with them. However, you may not have children with them. So it's kind of a blended family situation. Statistically, divorce rates rise with each new marriage. I'm not sure if we talked about that in this course before, but statistically, your most successful marriage is your first one, statistically. All right. And that may sound weird because you may be thinking, well, if I get married the second time, well, I've learned from my mistakes on the first one. And so we're older, we're more mature. But statistically, you're actually more likely to go through a divorce each and every time you get married. Does anybody have an idea why that might be occurring?
Because of the blended family. Like that's, it's hard to adjust with kids, and then we're parenting other people's kids, and it's, there's a lot of reasons, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, the adjustment itself among blended families of you're having to co-parent with your ex, you have a new husband or new wife, they have kids that are now brought into the situation, your kids and their kids are now living together, so you have that type of dynamic. You have that boundary of now I'm a new stepdad. Where is the boundary with me interacting with my stepkids? What can I do? What can I not do? These are just things that in your first intact family, you don't have to deal with any of those things. So that's good. There's some other reasons as well. In your first marriage, you've also never experienced divorce and you don't want to. So you've never gone down that road. So you have very idealistic ideas of being together forever, which is a good thing. That's a good thing. So you tend to work harder on your first marriage because you don't want to go down that road. Probably the biggest factor in why people fight so hard for their first marriage is because they tend to have children with their first husband or their first wife, and they don't want to put their kids through that. So each time you get remarried, statistically, well, number one, you've gone through a divorce, you know you can survive it. Number two, statistically, you probably don't have kids with your second husband or second wife, so it's easier to walk away. The third thing is that since you've known you've survived it, you see the red flags way ahead of time, and you may decide, I'm going to get out earlier than I did before. I see the writing on the wall, and so I'm going to go ahead and exit now. A lot of different reasons why. Each time you get married, statistically, getting divorced goes up. So adjusting is going to be a big adjustment for the kids, the newly married couples, and the exes. That's why it's going to be really important for everybody to be able to get along, to co-parent effectively, good communication, being cordial, especially around the kids. Establishing healthy boundaries between the step-parents and the step-children. That takes time, it takes patience. So if you are going to be a stepdad or a stepmom, it's really important to kind of ease into that situation very slowly and not just try to jump in and be super dad or super mom. You want to establish a level of rapport and trust with the child before you kind of move into a parenting situation. And I would say lastly, the most effective thing to allow blended families to really kind of work together is if the exes, they're cordial to each other, they're co-parenting effectively, they're not talking bad about each other around the kids, they're very positive, and they're very, very supportive. That's probably the biggest factor in kids adjusting to a divorce is how well the parents get along with each other and how well they work together in regards to co-parenting.